Hello and welcome. My name is Victor Gijsbers and I teach philosophy at Leiden University in the Netherlands. In this video I want to take a look at an article by Bernard Williams called The Makropulos Case, Reflections on the Tedium of Immortality. Now, the Makropulos Case is a play and an opera about a woman who has an elixir of life, and she lives until the age of 300 and something. And in the play and the opera, at this advanced age, she has become profoundly unhappy. She is extremely bored with her life. Nothing that, happens to her hasn't happened before already in one way or another. It's all just a sort of tedious repetition. And she, in the end, refuses to keep drinking this elixir of life and chooses death over immortality. So, Reflections on the Tedium of Immortality. Bernard Williams is going to be interested in the question of whether immortality is a good thing or a bad thing. And this play, the Makropulos Case, suggests that it might be a bad thing. Alright, so let's start with the question of whether death itself is something bad. I earlier made a video about Thomas Nagel's article on death, in which he suggests, yes, death is a bad thing because life is good, living is good, and death, even though you're not there when you're dead, still is a kind of loss. It is a loss for the person who lived and now no longer lives, that he won't be able to continue that life, right? Something good is taken from him. Williams is going to give a somewhat different analysis, but with the same conclusion. So Williams agrees with Nagel that death is in principle bad for us. And neither of them, by the way, are suggesting that death is always bad for us, right? I mean, if you are in a situation of horrible suffering which cannot be alleviated, maybe death is a good thing for you. And in fact, Williams is going to suggest that there's always going to be a point in your life, supposing that you were immortal, there's got to be some point at which death starts becoming a good thing for us. But, okay, we're not there yet. So at this point, Nagel and Williams are arguing that death is a bad thing, usually. Now, for Williams, his argument to that effect has to do with desires. Right? The idea is that we desire certain things, and that death is going to deprive us of the fulfillment of those desires. And if I have a desire, then not getting that desire fulfilled is usually seen as a bad thing for me. Now, in order to make this point, Williams has to say something about the nature of desire, because it could be thought that desires are conditional. Conditional, for instance, among other things maybe, but for instance, on being alive, right? You could say, well, if I am alive tomorrow, then I want to take a walk in the sun, right? That's my desire. My desire is, if I'm alive, I want to take a walk in the sun, right? So this would be a kind of conditional desire. And of course, we have certain conditional desires, right? If I have an itch, I want to scratch. I don't just want to scratch. It's not that scratching is my big desire. It's just that if I have an itch, I want to scratch. Now, Williams claims that many of our desires, perhaps, but certainly we have desires that are not conditional in this way. Desires that are categorical, to use one of these nice philosophical terms of art, which you might know from Kant, the categorical imperative. It's an imperative, it's something you have to do that has no conditions. So for Williams, a categorical desire is just something that you desire. And maybe even something like walking in the sun is already a categorical desire. I would like to walk in the sun. I mean, do I want to walk in the sun if I'm alive? No, I just want to walk in the sun. And one of the reasons that death would be a bad thing for me is that then I will no longer be able to walk in the sun. And if I think about deeper and more important things in my life, like something like seeing my kids grow up, right? Is it the case that I want to see my kids grow up if I continue to live? well, yes, but I also just want to see my kids grow up, right? And that's one of the reasons that I want to continue to live, and that it would be a bad thing for me to die. So, these categorical desires, these things that I just want without any sort of condition, the things that I just want, are the things that I won't be able to have if I die. And that, according to Williams, is why death is a bad thing for me. Alright, but if that's the case, does that mean that we have to go the other way, like to the other extreme? We started by contemplating whether maybe death could be not bad, but it seems to be bad. So does that mean that we have to wish for immortality? Well, this is where Williams brings in this Makropulos case. And what he tells us is that if you think about this scenario, you don't even have to know that much about sort of the actual details of the play or the opera, and Williams doesn't discuss many actual details. But if you think about this, then you can see maybe that if somebody has a stable personality, so they remain basically the same person, of course they experience some stuff, of course they're going to change a bit, but if they remain recognizably the same person, then at a certain point, Williams says, they will have more or less exhausted the kinds of experience, the kinds of relationships, the kinds of projects that are relevant and important to that kind of person. Right? Suppose that you had kids and you saw them grow up. And maybe you had kids again and you saw them grow up. At a certain point, right? At a certain point, you've kind of done this. You've kind of seen it. I mean, surely, like, the 30th time having kids and seeing them grow up is not going to be the same. It's not going to have the same kind of impact on you as the first or the second time. Well, the first time you really fall in love with someone and build up a relationship with them, if this kind of stuff keeps happening, like by the 20th time or the 50th time, at a certain point you're probably just repeating patterns, re-experiencing stuff that mostly reminds you of things you already did, and so on. And the same might be true with every other kind of relationship and project that you have in your life, right? And perhaps we can already, in our not so long lives, kind of recognize this, right? Not all the things that, like, I am in my 40s, not all the things that I experienced in my 20s I need sort of to have repeated. I mean, I did it, right? That's okay. It's fine. It was enough, right? And now I'm here for other things and newer pastures. And the suggestion is that, Williams' suggestion is that at a certain point you're just going to sort of exhaust what is possible for you. And at that point, immortality would become boredom, tedium, and death might seem to be a good way out. Now, in the latter part of the article, Williams thinks about maybe certain ways in which we can try to conceptualize immortality such that it doesn't seem to be boring. And first he gives us two criteria that any such story will have to live up to. So first of all, it has to be us who lives on, who is immortal, right? It has to be the same person. And second, whatever that person is doing has to be valuable, has to look valuable to the person that we are now, right? Only if it is I who continues to live, and only if what that continued life is going to look like seems valuable to me now, will immortality be something that is valuable to me now, something that I should desire. Well, it's fairly easy to think of ways in which immortality could not be boring that break one of these two rules. So suppose you have reincarnation with no memory, right? You live, you die, you live, you die, you live, you die. There's not going to be any boredom because every life is kind of your first life. But then again, it's not really you, right? Who is reincarnating? Not you with your personality. It's unclear why you should even care about these other lives and in what sense they are really sort of yours. So there would be no tedium, no boredom, but also not really you. Another thing that could happen is maybe I live on by, I step into the pleasure machine, which just injects some pleasure chemicals into my brain continuously for the rest of eternity, and I'm just sitting there in a haze of feeling happy. Well, there's no boredom there, but it's also not something that from my current perspective looks like a valuable and good life. Right? It doesn't. So neither of these models is a model where I continue to live forever a life that from my current perspective I can recognize as valuable. So, is there any other model of immortality where this does happen? Well, Williams is not aware of one. So he talks about some ways that philosophers and maybe theologians have tried to explain the blessings of an eternal afterlife. I mean, that's something that people have been talking about, right? You die, you go to heaven. It's going to be eternal. Well, what it's going to be like? Well, there's actually this is not mentioned by Williams, but there's a fairly funny passage in Mark Twain's book, Letters from the Earth, where Lucifer is the protagonist. He's not such a bad guy in this book. He's still friends with the other angels. And he goes to Earth to describe what human beings are up to, and he doesn't understand their religion. And he says, there's lots of people and they all want to go to heaven. And when they say what it's like in heaven, they say, well, in heaven we are sitting around playing harps and singing songs about God. And he's like, but in real life they don't enjoy playing harps and singing songs about God, so why do they think that they're going to enjoy that for eternity? Now that's a joke. But Williams is suggesting that there aren't any much better answers available to us. Right? I mean, some traditional answers might have been, well, we spend eternity in contemplation of the glory of God. Or maybe, who knows? But in what sense is it me? Right? I mean, what does my personality, what does me, my life history, my projects, my loves, my relationships, and so on, how do they play a role in this eternal contemplation of God? Right? In what sense is it really me who is living a life in that respect? This might be very unclear. Williams talks about some philosophers, including Spinoza, who have said that the intellectual life of contemplation is the best life there is. And there too he suggests, well, the idea of my own personality still playing any kind of role just doesn't seem to be there. Right? I mean, in the type of philosophy where contemplating the big metaphysical truths or something like that, I mean, that's what you're going to be doing for all eternity. Well, first of all, that doesn't seem to be what most people are interested in. But second of all, I mean, even if we do that, what would still be the difference between you and me and our respective histories and projects and desires and personalities and so on? So you seem to have to strip away the me in order to get to the value or the lack of boredom. So, what Williams concludes at the end of this article, and to be fair, I think it's more a sort of suggestive story than a really tightly argued, knockdown argument against a position, right? He's more sort of going through certain options and pointing out that none of them is obviously appealing. His conclusion at the end is that we have not been given a model of immortality that would clearly be both my immortality and valuable to the person I am now, contemplating the prospect of being immortal. So, death is bad, immortality is bad. What's the good thing? Well, the good thing, William says, is to die not before the boredom sets in, but also not after the boredom sets in. Right? So you're living your life, you are still experiencing, fulfilling these possibilities that are meaningful to you, that are new to you. At a certain point, who knows after how many years, the boredom will set in. What you've got to do is die, well, basically at the exact moment that you get from not being bored to being bored. And he tells us about that. Well, death tends to be either too early or too late. But you could be happy, you could be lucky, and die at the right moment. That is actually the advice that Nietzsche gives us in Thus Spake Zarathustra. Die at the right moment. Very different from Nagel. Nagel basically suggests that death is bad, right? You shouldn't want to die. Williams is telling us death starts out being bad. At a certain point it will become good. So try to die at the right moment, insofar as you have any control over that. I think I'll probably make some more videos that have to do with this idea of death. But for now, I'll leave you with these thoughts by Bernard Williams.